Oh, it's really is tragic news for the Victorian economy. I mean, every day that this lockdown continues, then the recession will get deeper and longer, and the opportunities that are there for people to get jobs, young people to get jobs afterwards, just get harder and harder. So it's essential, I think, that the Premier holds his nerve, and as far as he can, he doesn't introduce any further restrictions, and indeed looks to open them up. Because I think we've got to keep this in proportion. I mean, 428 cases is a lot, but if you look at, say, Miami, Greater Miami, similar population to Melbourne, you know, those numbers are rising at 10 times that amount. They've got 20,000 people in hospital right now. So, you know, we have to just keep this in proportion and not get it out of proportion, but at the same time clearly take strong action.
Yeah, because we know that this is a dual health and economic crisis. James Cullen, I know in a previous life you were advising on policy for Chris Bowen. You've seen up close how some of these tough decisions are made between economic hardship and the health benefits in that health portfolio in particular. Where do you land on this debate we've seen this week about suppression versus elimination in the context of what we're seeing in Victoria?
Hi, Ash. Look, I think it's really not a place for extremes, these debates. I think this sort of false dichotomy we have with suppression versus herd, I just don't think that's the Australian way. We're going to be somewhere in the middle, and that's where, thankfully, both decision makers and the health and economic advice has been. I know that's meant some difficult calls, which we don't all agree with, and I know that we can definitely quibble around the margins of some of the lockdowns, perhaps in New South Wales and Victoria. But broadly, I think Australian decision makers have got it right. We know there's an economic price to pay, but for something so contagious as a health crisis, and we know there's things that we can do and rules that we can put in place, and people can socially distance and sensibly, implement themselves in their own lives to stop the spread, because it is a terrible illness, and I've seen it really close in the context of my own firm and my boss who had it. It was in ICU for a few weeks. I wouldn't wish it upon anyone. And when decision makers have decisions within their midst to be able to make to sort of stop the spread, you support them, and I think that's what's happening in Australia and in Victoria at the moment.
Yeah, and that decision-making process really going to be reaching a high point in the next few days. The government putting the final touches, of course, on next week's budget update, due to be handed down on Thursday by the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. Nick Cater, what direction are you expecting the government will head in when it comes to the future of things like JobSeeker and JobKeeper? We're all obviously desperate to know just what they're planning for the coming months as we continue to see some of these states like Victoria and businesses there in particular needing extra help.
Yes, but look, let's keep this in perspective once again. I mean, we're talking about one state which has a high number of cases, and the rest of the country is doing very well indeed, including New South Wales, although of course it's quite difficult. We simply cannot keep these allowances at this level, because it would just, it's just unsustainable in the long run. In some cases, in the case of some people in hospitality, it's actually becoming arguably a disincentive to actually seek work. So at some stage we have to wind those back. I think it'll be done in a staged fashion. It'll be done very sensitive to the hardship that's out there. But we've just got to recognise it's going to be very, very hard, that even when we see the numbers come down from the virus and things get easier, the economic consequences are going to be with us for years, and I think the long-term economic consequences probably for a generation or more. We've just got to brace for this, and the government can't solve all our problems.
Yeah, James Cullen, what do you make of that argument that we have seen this disincentive going on in terms of some casual workers not picking up those extra shifts at bars, for example, because they're getting more on JobSeeker by not turning up to work? That sort of situation isn't sustainable going forward, is it?
Look, that's right, actually. I mean, I'm largely a unity ticket with Nick on this, I've got to say. I think there needs to be a targeted winding back over the next few months, and that's obviously going to have to be sensitive to what's happening in Victoria. I think quite rightly, early on, back in March, the government erred on the side in the way it designed the JobKeeper and JobSeeker in particular, to err on the side of keeping people, stable and with cash in their pocket, regardless of the dire economic and employment circumstances as well. So, obviously there's a need to readjust that. We know there's been a Treasury review So we'd expect to sort of see some winding back there over the next few months. It's entirely appropriate. It's the way to do these things, to sort of be measured. And look, I think they're on the side of keeping even profitable businesses with JobKeeper support. So there's probably not a need for that as you wind it back. Remember, we're talking about, in the case of JobKeeper, $3 billion a week going into the economy, and that's a lot of support to simply snap back. So we know that's not going to happen. It's going to have to be done more gradually. And that's what we expect. But I think the key thing, Ash, is next week. It's the first time we're really going to see from Treasury the economic impact, but the impact on the budget and debt going forward. And as Nick points out, this will be with us for generations to come, and it's the way it's got to be.
Because, Nick, we saw the unemployment data out yesterday showing the official unemployment rate is now sitting at 7.4%, but nobody's under any illusion that that is a realistic picture of the jobless rate in this country at the moment.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's probably more likely to be in the low double digits, perhaps a bit higher, but we don't actually know that. We won't know that. But I think what I really feel, I really feel for the people who are coming up, trying to start their first job, graduates coming out of university, because they've never seen anything like this in their lifetime. You know, unemployment in double digits, and the effect that has on opportunities, on wages, on everything. So, I really think I can't emphasise enough, we've got to move on and take into account the economic side of this. You know, whatever marginal benefit there might be through, a stage 4 lockdown will be far outweighed by the amount of pain and misery it will create, people losing their jobs, businesses going broke. So I really hope that Daniel Andrews holds his nerves on this and looks at the consequences of the lockdown. It's not consequence-free. The consequences are really serious.
Yeah, but as we heard Brett Sutton explaining in news conferences over the last couple of days, he's really been going to lengths to stress that the death toll is going to rise, James Cullen. This is something that we all need to be aware of and brace ourselves for in the coming days. Even with those lockdowns in place, the death toll is already climbing. Just another 3 deaths of elderly Australians overnight there in Victoria, we learnt today. And the argument is that these lockdowns need to stay in place to keep the numbers down, and therefore try and keep the death toll down as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think Victoria, I think so far so good, Nick. I think they are managing to hold their nerve. I think they would try to resist sort of further restrictions quite clearly. But the numbers are concerning, and I think quite rightly state governments are focusing on the impact. They are the front line when it comes to our health system and resourcing for our hospitals and for our ICU. And you can quickly get overwhelmed. We've seen that time and time again overseas, particularly with these secondary outbreaks as well, including in states of the United States. So, look, they need to be really careful, and I think they have to continue to be guided by the health advice as well. But, these guys, they do have a mind to the economy. They understand the terrible, crippling impact this has on business and people who have been without work for a period of time now. So, look, it's about getting through this as swiftly as possible, but with attention to detail, and making sure that we keep as many people alive as possible and stopping the spread. So, look, I think in terrible circumstances, and no one, this outbreak, the secondary outbreak in Victoria is terrible. I think decision makers are doing a really good thing, and I'm hoping we can get through this.